teachers were doing this.
The course is oral history, and we've been trying to gather for the archives an oral history of Augsburg for the centennial kind of the
150th.
Yeah,
whatever
whatever
it is.
goofy word it is.
Yeah.
So what they're looking to do is try to get oral histories of people on campus that they think would have an impact for future generations.
I've been here a long time. Who's old enough to do this?
There's a lack of oral histories in the archives, so we've been trying to.
Cool. And everybody in the class is doing interviews?
Yeah, and the class is held once every 2 years, so it's been a slow kind of build. Because I think there's, including Michael, I think there might be 9 people in the class. So it's a small class, so slowly, over time, we've been trying to add and just try to document it, and it gives us practice in doing oral history. And
is it interesting? Do you like the course?
Yeah, it's a public history course, and as a historian, it's becoming really helpful as I go forward in my teaching, learning how to kind of interpret history outside of the academia. So, for more of the general people, like the general public, it's been a lot of fun. I've gotten a lot of good ideas. Met a lot of people from the History Center. We brought them in, in various aspects. So it's
cool.
It's been great. What I was planning to focus on, just so you have kind of a game plan, is kind of just how you got to Augsburg. I was reading your bio and kind of some background information on you. You've been kind of distinguished since you've been here.
I guess, sure.
As a future teacher, I was starting to look kind of through some of the stuff you wrote, and so it's gonna be kind of more in the teaching areas.
Oh, sure. I love to talk about teaching. I have no opinions at all.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same. I'm like, no, I'm okay. If I should student teacher.
Turn the freaking PowerPoint off.
Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. So it gets fun when a teacher is use PowerPoint and you come in and you don't use PowerPoint, and students kind of look at you like, what do we do? And you're like,
if you want to show them a picture, do it.
Yeah.
If you're standing there reading them text out of the book, that's not teaching.
So I'll do my little introduction for the marker and the recording.
Okay, great.
Today is March 12th, 2015.
Is it on?
Yep. Oh. I put it on so it make sure it's.
So you heard all my snarky remarks up until this point. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
It'll be cut up. Don't worry.
Right. Yeah. Here we go. Snapchat.
Today is March 12th, 2015. My name is Eric Olson, and my narrator is Diane Pike. We are at Augsburg College in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My first question for you, Diane, is can you just kind of tell me how you got to Augsburg?
I had a very linear path that not everybody is able to have in these days and times. I went to college. I went to graduate school. I got married. My husband and I were looking for 2 jobs in the same city. He got the job at 3M. I got the job at Augsburg. Here we are.
What was your background in?
I'm a sociologist.
So your undergrad was in sociology?
Sociology and anthropology, double major at Connecticut College.
What kind of, was it just more of wanting to teach that drew you towards?
I didn't know I wanted to teach until I got to graduate school. I went to graduate school because I couldn't believe somebody would pay me money to study a discipline that I was enthralled with. And so I went just to do the degree, to do sociology. I'm sad to say I didn't have really a plan. And I would say probably around my 3rd year, it became really clear to me that I was going to have a lot more enthusiasm for teaching than for research. Not that I don't think research, I can do it, and I think I can do it well, but you have institutional choices. And if I were at an R1 institution, I would be spending X amount of my time on research and with graduate students and Y amount of my time on teaching undergraduates. If I came to a place like Augsburg or another liberal arts college, that proportion would probably be reversed.
Can you think of a moment in grad school that was kind of like your aha moment?
I don't know if it was the aha moment. One of the opportunities I had, I went to Yale for my PhD, and Yale does not use the typical model for an R1. The faculty actually teach the courses. It's not a lecturer and a gazillion TAs who are really teaching the course. And that's part of why they do undergraduate education so well. So most graduate students don't teach their own courses, or at least they didn't then. I still think they don't. My daughter just graduated from there, and she had courses with professors, not taught by graduate students. And even though we know they can sometimes be better than the profs. But one of the professors there, actually a fairly famous sociologist named Donald Black, was on sabbatical, and he had probably one of the most popular courses in the sociology curriculum. The undergraduate major in sociology at Yale is not like the undergraduate history major, for example, at Yale, which is like awesome and renowned. The graduate department was excellent, but the undergrad program was really pretty lukewarm. And it was the largest single course that they taught, and he was going to be on leave. So they actually let me teach the sociology of police course as a graduate student, as the instructor with graduate students helping me. So I had 120 students in that class. And so the fact that despite the challenges and ups and downs, that went pretty well, and I kind of got buzzed on doing all of that. I think that's certainly one of the experiences that I had that confirmed to me that this is really how I would like to spend the bulk of my time in academia, rather than, I said, what's that balance between teaching and research? And that, I think that's one, if that had gone poorly, or if I had hated that, I don't think that I would have continued on that path. So that unusual opportunity, I think, kind of sealed the deal on the kinds of institutions I was primarily looking for when I went on the job market. Now, that said, I applied to every kind of institution on the job market, and I did have an offer from an R1, and I had an offer from, a state place, and then I had the offer from Augsburg.
Just so we can clarify, what is an R1?
Oh, sorry, that's code, academia code, my apologies. It's academia code for a research institution. So R1s are flagship research institutions like University of Minnesota. Okay. The Minnesota state system would be called an R2. It's a way of tiering things. And then you have comprehensive colleges that have master's degrees. Then you have pure liberal arts colleges like Macalester. Mm-hmm. So R1s are large universities whose primary mission is research. They have graduate programs in law schools and med schools and that sort of thing. Colleges do not.
Okay. You mentioned that you kind of caught the teaching bug almost accidentally, like you were teaching the class, and was there?
Sorry, go ahead.
Did you have any teaching experience before then?
You're at Yale. You were not allowed to be a TA until your third year. So I think I must have taught this course my fourth year. It's been so long I don't remember. Because they want you to do your own thing, and was one of the great things about being in that program. It wasn't like you're a graduate student and your first semester you're the TA for intro, which is very typical at other schools. It's really about your own intellectual development. I think I TA'd 1 or 2 courses, and I TA'd other courses after I did that sociology of police course. I just can't quite remember. I was in graduate school for 6 years. I would have been done in 5, but my husband, who was working on his PhD in physics, had to start his dissertation over because the nuclear accelerator would not go to the energy levels that he wanted. So he was about 6 months in, and they had to change course. So I basically intentionally slowed down my progress. But graduate school was different then, in the sense too that most people got their degrees and then went out. Now people are staying longer in graduate school because they're getting publications, and they come out with more. They stay longer, but they come out with more for their time. So it's not atypical to see people stay in 6 and 7 years. But I loved school, so that I think was I loved being a student, so I think that was part of loving thinking about being a teacher and staying in the classroom.
Was there a certain professor or teacher from your past that you were, once you started kind of teaching, did you just start kind of,
in graduate school?
Did you try to emulate in any way? Or?
Not in graduate school. My undergraduate faculty I did try to emulate. I think they had certainly more of an impact on me as a teacher than my graduate faculty. So I had 2 very good advisors in sociology at Connecticut College, very different in personality and type, both very fine sociologists, really good teachers. So I certainly wanted to try to do for my students what they tried to do for me.
What about those professors were you trying to...
Well, like I said, they're very different. Art Ferrari was, so I graduated from college in 1975. So he had a beard and he had long hair and he just kind of, was really cool. But he was such a good sociologist and such a good teacher in terms of posing questions and engaging discussion that made you want to think about the answer to the question. And both of them gave us challenging stuff, not big digested textbooks, but excuse me, primary readings. Excuse me. And so, I felt like I was really being challenged and asked to, to kind of rise to the occasion about the work and the assignments that we were given. My, excuse me, my other advisor, Jerry Winter, he was a organizational sociologist and a theorist, and he was really, God, how would I describe him? He was very cynical, but not in a way that like sort of put you off and made you depressed, but made you not like sit around and just accept the world the way it was. And so he was very effective in class as well, because like art, his ability to be able to get you to care about what you were talking about. And I'm sure I couldn't have articulated that when I was an undergraduate student. But most of my professional work at Augsburg has been in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. I was director of the Center for Teaching and Learning here. So, I have a vocabulary to look at it back on now that I didn't have at the time.
No, you didn't have any education classes of any kind. You were
Nope.
a straight sociologist?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
How well do you think that impacted you? Like, not, sometimes teachers get very muddled and get caught up in, this is the standard format. Do you feel in any way that being kind of outside and being able to kind of develop your own style and then coming to teaching, do you feel like that helped you at all?
You mean as opposed to the fact that I didn't have any education courses?
Yeah, like you didn't have like an undergrad in
yeah. So what was that, a benefit or a deficit? Is that your question?
Yeah, what do you feel that it was a benefit that not being in a teacher program and then getting into teaching? Do you think it was able to?
I do. First of all, because it means that what I know is sociology, right? The good fortune I had was that when I showed up at Augsburg, it was the year that the college had gotten its very first faculty development grant. And Norma Noonan, who was the director of that grant and a faculty member in political science, asked me to be involved in that grant by being the grant assessor kind of thing. And thanks to her, I very early on got linked up with faculty development. Now, there's some overlap with teacher education and faculty development, but they are not the same thing. So my hypothetical question, and I say this with all due respect because, with all due respect because I really admire my colleagues in education, but I would say this as a sociologist about the disciplines. If teacher preparation and teaching about teaching is so significant, then you would expect the quality of teaching in education departments to be significantly higher than the quality of teaching in non-education departments. And that's an empirical question. Are all the good teachers in the education departments? Are all the good college teachers in the education departments? And I don't see any evidence. They look to me like a normal department. Some people are really good. Some people maybe could be better. Some people are, whatever. And so let me say that generally, not about my colleagues whom I respect here. But I think it does say something about what we think is necessary in order to be effective. So what helped make me a really good teacher, and clearly when I did that police course and when I did the TA course, I had really positive experiences. I had positive reinforcement and good feedback, and I loved doing it. And I still, even after 33 years, I love prepping for class. I love thinking about what we're going to do. And then I like going to class. But faculty development to the best of my understanding from, we've had students who majored in soc and done the social science thing, so I know a little bit from the outside, and I've read some stuff that, because I'm teaching adults, so I don't want to pretend to say anything about how well they prepare teachers to teach elementary school. I'm talking about teaching in college in that. It's not about my lesson plan, really, or maybe just lesson plan is a word for, what do you want to do and what do you want students to understand and what's going to be a really effective way to do that. And so faculty development is, I think, linked, and we've learned a lot from the education people, but they're not synonymous. And so I think the thing that has helped me be a better teacher has been the fact that the scholarship of teaching and learning is my professional area as a sociologist. And so I'm really we keep hiring people who are really good in history or chemistry and biology, and they don't know a squat about teaching. And I'm like, well, but that's the job, right? Isn't the job teaching? And higher education is built on this notion that as long as you know your subject matter, everything else will just kind of work itself out. And that's just not empirically true.
Now, you have been nominated for a distinguished faculty 3 times, I believe it was on your bio.
At Augsburg?
At Augsburg.
Yeah, when they used to have student awards.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
When did you actually receive those awards? Do you remember?
Oh, it was early on. It was in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
And then they stopped giving the student awards. So I have a Distinguished Contributions to Teaching Awards from the college. I, in 2012, won the highest teaching award that the American Sociological Association gives. So, it's kind of what I do.
Yeah, that was my segue into the next question. So that was
sorry.
Perfect. No, that's fine.
Yeah, no, it was very thrilling. I mean, the stuff from the students is very meaningful. And when I first came here, the senior class would vote for the 2 honored faculty members, and then they decided it was a popularity contest or it wasn't a popularity contest. And so students don't have any input into that anymore. There's a student government project for somebody.
Do you feel that's something that should be brought back?
I don't know. I mean, it's good for one's ego, and there's a lot of ego involved in teaching, and I think people lie, right? If they're saying, no, I don't, does it bother me if somebody hates my course? You bet, and it bothers me for 2 reasons. It bothers me because I feel like, this isn't what's best for the student, and they're being let down in some way. Mm-hmm. Maybe sometimes because I'm not doing what I want to do, but it can also be because, not everybody is the right fit for every student. And I think there's benefit from students trying to learn in courses where they don't like the professor, assuming that the professor's competent, right? I mean, we're not talking about people who don't know what they're doing, right? It just as a professor has to learn to work with and understand and mentor students who are like them and students who are very different from them. It's really, it's a two-way thing. So I learn when I work with a student who's having a hard time or doesn't really like the course or doesn't click with me, just as I think students should say, okay, well, I don't like Professor so-and-so, but they are competent, and how am I going to make this a situation where I'm going to learn to the best of my ability?
No, we don't have the student
Mm-hmm.
nominated awards anymore
Mm-hmm.
at Augsburg, but there are websites like Rate My Professor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever kind of go on there?
No, I looked on there once
Mm-hmm.
when it had been out about 6 months, and there was one about me, and it said, she gets really upset, but if you do the work, it's really good. Okay, if you do and that was the upshot. I mean, and I've heard that before, and I would say, and it makes me feel bad and sad and okay at the same time. So I had a McNair student I was working with a couple of years ago, and she came in, she said, I was just telling this group of people I was working with you, and they said, Diane Pike, she's like so mean. And I've heard that a couple, nobody wants to be thought of as mean, but every time I've heard that, Eric, I've said, well, what, even when a student has said, well, I don't, this isn't where I'm like, well, tell me why, right? And every time they say the same thing, right? And I said to him, why did they say that? And they said it's because you get really mad if they don't do the work. And I thought, yep, that's true. And if that's a sophomore's definition of mean, that they come in and they got a million reasons they haven't done this. I'm not their friend. I'm not going to say it's fine. Now that's totally different from, we lost this student and people have personal traumas, and I'm very open and flexible. I'm talking about that. But this other stuff about, I had to go to work and I didn't have time and it's too much reading, and, nobody ever rises to a low bar.
Set the bar high and have people come up.
You got to set the bar high and you got to give them a way to get there. Mm-hmm. So I do have this reputation, I think. I mean, one never knows one's reputation fully, but I've been here long enough to know that she's really hard, or she's really demanding, or she's really mean, because I'm not the, I'm so sorry, Eric, that you couldn't, and I have colleagues like that. Any excuse in a storm, and students don't want to feel, feel some sort of negativity when they haven't met their obligations. And I meet mine. I'm prepared for every class. I start on time. I end on time. I work my butt off. And I kind of expect the same of them, unless it's, life is more important, right? But most of the she's mean comes from the students are like, well, I got behind and she didn't cut me any slack. Well, yeah, that's true. That's true.
If it makes you feel any better, I deal with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always kind of, right, is there something going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you not do the work?
Right.
Right. Typically you can tell.
Yep.
Has that been a change, or has that been fairly constant your entire time?
No,
you said you've been here 33 years?
Yeah, I think that's to your earlier question, because I went to schools where the bar was really high and nobody wanted to listen to you whine about how you couldn't get your work done.
Is that part what you think makes you an effective teacher? Is that you do set that bar high and then scaffold them up to it?
If my view of an effective teacher is one where the students learn and they have a positive affective experience around that learning. And that doesn't mean they don't read something that makes them uncomfortable or have to work really hard, or I don't know these words. Well, look them up, sweetie. That's what you need to do. So for me, effective is the context in which students learn more rather than less. And so I think in that sense that hasn't changed very much over the course of my teaching. I think that's always been what I've been interested in.
Has the student mentality, there's usually a lot of talk, well, this new generation,
oh my God,
they think the same way.
Yeah.
In your opinion, has it...
Oh my God, you should read my paper. Do you want to read my paper?
Sure.
I'll send it to you. I'll give it to you when you leave. I wrote a paper when I was president of the Midwest Sociological Society, and it's called The Tyranny of Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning. And the first one is the tyranny of this notion that students are just not as good as they used to be. And I'm like, well, get over it, because you got the students you got, and what are you going to do? And bemoaning that they're not, first of all, I'm not sure it's empirically true that the students long ago, they might have been quieter or they might have had different issues, but there's no empirical evidence necessarily to show. Although there are some differences, I said in class the other day, when I first came here, diversity was whether you were an Anderson or a Peterson. For real, right? And then about 3 years ago, I looked around in my intro social class, and I realized that white students were the minority in that group of 25 students. I had Hmong students and Asian Americans and Hispanics and, a lot of people from the East African community. And it was awesome. I teach sociology. I see that as a good change. So the people in front of me are different than the people I had in front of me in 1985. But the task is the same, right? How do you take the students who are in front of you and help them to learn things you think that will benefit them to know?
So do you kind of every year kind of just gauge? In my opinion, an effective teacher understands the students and kind of adjusts the learning to help. And is that,
yeah, I don't think I sit down and say, well, they're going to be more narcissistic than last year or whatever. I do a much better job, and have for the last 15 or 20 years than I did in the beginning, of trying to get a better sense of who's in the room, right? What do they already know, right? And I'm not a let's design this course together person. I'm not a we're going to build the syllabus together kind of person, which is not to say I don't think students should have choice, right, and options, but if they're going to do it all on their own, they don't need to pay me any money, right? So so that balance within that, but I do try to pay a lot of attention to who's in the room and what are they bringing in, and then tailor examples or just be aware of those things, because I think that helps. There's a lot of barriers to learning for students, but I don't think you deal with those barriers by lowering the bar. You might change something about the bar, or you might, I mean, I love the class program. I think if a student needs an extra hour and they do fine, I'm like, well, yeah, what. But I was in a meeting probably 10 years ago with a colleague in a not to be named other department, and they were talking about how stressed out the students are because students do work more now, and students do, some of the students seem to put their social life higher on the list than others. And, but a lot of it's stress, and, the parents wait till freshman year to divorce, and students die and things happen, it is really hard. But this colleague stood up and she said, so I've realized that my students have so much other stuff going on in their lives that I've decided to reduce the amount of work I ask them to do. She said that in a room full of faculty, and I'm just like, and she was trying to be nice, right? Or she was trying to be responsive to the students, but I was appalled. It's one thing to say, so I'm going to think about this differently, or I'm going to rearrange the assignments differently, or I'm going to, give them more supports, or I'm going to, take that into account in how I do it. But I'm not going to ask them to learn less. Mm-hmm. So.
If you could you tell me about your work on teaching effectiveness and student engagement?
Sure.
That's part of their bio that I kind of wanted to hit on.
Yeah. So can you ask me something specific? I mean,
how is it? I was looking at all the stuff, and you've talked about kind of student engagement, mm-hmm. and you'd mentioned PowerPoints, mm-hmm. and I'm always been curious on not unconventional ways, but kind of more engaging ways, because mm-hmm. it's a problem I see even at the K-12 level. Mm-hmm. The students there's an engagement issue. So I'm just mm-hmm. wondering if you have you've been teaching for a long time, you've done fairly well mm-hmm. from everything that I could find mm-hmm. out about you. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering what about what for a future teacher, what advice would you give them on to be effective and how to get students more engaged?
Sure. Part of the advice I would give would be, well, it kind of depends. If you're talking about college teaching and K through 12, I think I would have different advice.
Let's start with college.
Okay, yeah, because I don't really know what I'm talking about with it. Although there's some very good stuff from the high school teachers. I went to a workshop that had college professors and high school teachers, and it was really good because it raised the snooty college professors' views of what some wonderful things high school teachers were doing that we could learn from. And then the opposite happened too, right? The high school teachers had a lot better understanding of what the students needed to be able to do when they got into the college classroom. So it was a kind of win-win, and everybody felt better about everybody by the end. But I'm not an expert in that area. I think first of all, it goes back to what we were talking about, is that you have to pay some attention to who's in the room. Now, my teaching is informed by the fact that I'm a sociologist, not because I teach sociological topics, but because as a sociologist, right, I understand teaching and learning to be a interdependent, relational, social process. And I don't really care what part of your brain lights up when X, Y, or Z happens. I'm interested in how social context influences motivation, mm-hmm. right? So one of the things, I'll give you this article, you don't have to read it, but one of the things I rant on is about using points to grade things, right? Points are an extrinsic motivator. And one of the things that happens when my argument is when you use points is that two things happen. One, it turns students into grade grubbers, turns them into point grubbers, because they know if I could just talk you into one more point, I'd be an 89, and then I'd be a 3.5, and blah, 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 blah. So I don't use points. And my grades are, we give 3.0s, 4.0s, 3.5s, right? So if you write a paper, it's excellent. That's a 4.0. I don't have to mess with that. Well, your 4.0 paper is a 98, but your 4.0 paper is a 95. And at some point, that's going to make a difference. I think it implies a quantitative methodology that's not, in fact, quantitative. That most faculty then go, oh, this is pretty good, 85 points, right? So, I really dislike points with that. But I think engagement, and because students are different, that there needs to be a blend of both extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. And so I take attendance, and I tell people that if they're not here, there's a learning that's going on, and if you miss a whole bunch of classes, that's going to take its toll. I have colleagues who think as long as you get a good grade on the exams and papers, it's fine. I think that's absolute bullshit. If I thought that your education at Augsburg was fully captured simply in your exams and papers, I think I would be missing the boat. And so if the education is more than just your points on your exams and papers, then your experiences, your responsibilities in the classroom, your connection with the other people when they put their phones down long enough, which they don't get out in my class, as you can imagine, that's part of the education and the learning process. So thinking about having an array of things, some of which are extrinsic, this has to be done, and if it's not, there's these consequences, and some people will be motivated by that. But then also the motivation by your responsibility to the other students, my expectations, making a lot of effort to try to think of, the kind of readings that they do, or being more, one of the things I've been trying to do the last couple of years is to be, probably longer than that, one of the things I keep working on is trying to be more explicit in advance about telling students why I'm asking them to do what I'm asking them to do. That goes a long way for engagement, right? As opposed to, we'll just do this, right? And I'm a pretty good lecturer. I can be funny sometimes. I'm pretty smart. And I think all those things can help. And I love what I do, right? So the faculty development literature is pretty clear about things that make a difference, right? Ability to generate enthusiasm, competence in content, organizational skill, and effective delivery. It's a performance in part, not exclusively, and not every teacher's a performer teacher. You can be a really good teacher with lots of different kinds of personal styles, absolutely. However, whatever your style, competence in the content, organization, effective delivery, and demonstration of why this matters, cut across whatever style, whether they're loud or quiet or jumping around the room or doing other stuff. Those things I think really feed into engagement. And when I walk by classrooms on my way to class, and I walk through Orrin, and every single classroom is the lights are off, the screen is on, there's text on the slide. Now, to be fair, maybe they're just doing it for 5 minutes and they turn it off. But you're a student. There's too many classes where that's, if 2 slides are good, well, why aren't 20 slides better? Images, maps, data, visuals, great, right? But text, not so much. And the research is pretty clear on that. When they do research on PowerPoint, for example, which is one of my little hot buttons, and it's not teachers' fault, right? In the 80s, we gave people stipends to put their lectures on PowerPoint. We paid people to do it. And for some people, it was great because they were way more organized than, the stream of consciousness that they were doing before. So I don't blame them. It just turned out it didn't work out the way we thought. And 2 things happen, right? If you ask, because people will say to me when I was director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I do a lot of teaching stuff in sociology. So the other thing is being a sociologist has made me really effective in, assessment, engagement, curriculum, that kind of stuff. And being in faculty development has really helped me advance my career in sociology. So I've been I've been really, really lucky with that. But what students will tell you two things. Do you like do you want PowerPoint slides? Yes, they do. They want PowerPoint slides. Because they're the teacher's notes. Of course they want PowerPoint slides. I don't have to write anything down, right? And then the number one word that most students use about PowerPoint in college teaching is what?
Mine is usually death.
Yeah, and what's the B word for death? But not for death. What's another way of saying that? The number one word students use to describe PowerPoint use in the classroom is boring.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Right. So we're on the same page.
Yeah, I was like...
So I tell my colleagues, right? Yes, they want them, but they also find them boring. So stop using them, or post them. If you want to post them because you think they'll have good notes on that, go ahead. But stop standing to the side of the screen in a dark room, turning like this, and reading what's on the screen. It doesn't work. It's not engaging. It works a little, right? But it's not engaging. And it also depends, I think, too, on what you're clear. One of the greatest things that happened to me as a teacher was years ago. Bruce Reichenbach, who's retired a couple of years, a philosophy professor, brought the campus Bloom's taxonomy and started doing all this stuff on critical thinking back when it was kind of coming in vogue. And the Bloom's taxonomy thing, it's not rocket science. It's not the only model in the world, but it made me clearer. It's like, oh man, this is a knowledge comprehension question. And what I really want them to do over here is synthesis and evaluation. It made me clearer so I could be clearer for the students. And it was really super helpful. So when I put you in a group, I can, I don't put you in a group and say, well, what'd you think of the reading? You put them in a group, you say, okay, your first job is comprehension. Talk about what you think the author is saying. Then we can process that. And then we can talk about whether you agree with them or not, and why you agree with them, or what it links to the theory or the other things that we've been talking about. So I'm really grateful to my colleagues because, whether it's Bloom's taxonomy or some of the technology stuff. So, I love being able to show video clips. I love being able to, show a map if we're looking at something. But you put the map up, you talk about it, and then you turn the sucker off. Because when I'm talking about something that I think is relevant, I want people, to look at me. And that's why laptops are a disaster in classes. And of course I'm happy to accommodate anybody who needs the accommodation. That's not the issue. But this idea, St. Paul Public Schools bought all those iPads, and they have no freaking idea what to do with them. The newspaper said, I'm screaming in the kitchen, they bought like 40,000 iPads. Next year, they're going to figure out how to train the teachers. How about if we figure out what we need the technology to do, and we have the teachers tell us, and then we go buy the iPads? How about that? Because the last thing I'd want if I was a high school teacher is a bunch of people sitting there with the iPads in front of them. What the hell's the point of being in the room together? And they don't have a clue. And I love St. Paul Public Schools. My kids all went to St. Paul Public Schools. They all went to Central. I'm a happy taxpayer. But this iPad thing is just because they don't know why they want them, other than you're supposed to have technology. And I think Augsburg's future continues to be, the promise is about high touch, right? The kind of relationship you have with Mike or the other people in the faculty. That's what your education is about, right? It's not your score on your last test, I would suggest.
So with more, not more and more, but kind of a trend is you're getting a lot more content online, and kind of that connection to the professor is sometimes being a little bit more distant. How do you feel about kind of the engagement level when more stuff is put online?
Honestly, it just depends, right? If you're a seasoned professional nurse and you need to get a master's degree in nursing to be able to advance in your career, and there's a significant chunk of that you can do online, that's probably fine if you're that kind of learner, okay? 18-year-old Eric Olson? I don't think so. Right? And what I say to people is, okay, if you would like your child to get their college education sitting on their laptop in your basement, go ahead. But it's not what most people want, right? So I think it really has to be nuanced, and I think it depends on whether you're, got a more narrowly professionally focused thing. It depends on the style of the learner. It depends on the age of the learner. So there's a place for that, but that doesn't mean everybody should go to ASU and take one of their 70 online courses, because we don't have any idea what a college-educated group that's been college-educated online looks like. We don't know yet. I could be completely wrong. But I will wait tables before I will teach an online course. Because it's not what I signed up for. Mm-hmm. It's not what I signed up. It's a really different job to me. I'm not going to judge anybody else, but to me, because I have colleagues who do them online, they love it. Sometimes I love it because, I can, do it in my pajamas. Well, there's a good intellectual reason for it. They love it because it gives people who don't have access. I'm all over that. But instead of this, no. If it's that or nothing, absolutely. If it's let's shut this down and do that instead, I don't think so. But, that's... I read the Chronicle a lot. I'm very interested in the fact that right now, in all of education, but particularly in higher education, the answer to every problem in higher ed, and there are certainly problems, there are things that need to be fixed big time, and I can be right in the front of the line telling you this isn't working, this isn't working. But when I read the Chronicle, the answer to everything is digital learning. And I'm not swallowing it. I think they're wrong. I don't think they're wrong about the problems, but I think they're wrong about the solutions. And they're very surface solutions about what technology, and most of the people who hold that opinion don't teach face-to-face, and so they don't know what will and will not work. And what they do is they give a multiple choice standardized test at the end, and there's no statistically significant difference between the intro class and the online and the face-to-face, and they say, see, they're the same. I'm like, no, they're not the same. So, but there are pockets in places where that kind of technology, there's really good stuff with problem-based learning and using technology. I mean, it's totally an asset. It's just not an asset the way a lot of people are trying to force it on things. So it's not an anti-technology, anti-Luddite thing. It's be really clear about what problem you're trying to solve here, because I think there's a lot of assertions about stuff that nobody has any evidence for. They're just guessing what the impact is going to be. Mm-hmm. They used to have keyboarding in elementary schools and all these computers, and maybe you don't have to. Maybe the most important thing in second grade isn't that, right? The most important thing in second grade is how nice your teacher is, because that's what's going to motivate you to learn if you're a second grader. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, what else you got?
You've kind of touched about this, just listening to you talk. You've talked about how PowerPoints are misused a lot of the times. There's text up there, and kind of looking forward, smart boards right now are kind of like the iPad of, the whiteboard. Mm-hmm. It's becoming the next evolution.
So I don't use a smartboard. So tell me how they're being used.
A smartboard is basically.
I know what it is.
Yeah, a digital whiteboard, and from my experience, from what I've seen, is they're being used exactly the same way as a whiteboard. So it's basically they've, instead of writing on it, they just type it up ahead of time.
Okay, so a smartboard is typed.
Yeah. You plug your computer into it, and you can still draw on it with the markers. Okay. They have special markers for it that you can draw, and it'll save onto the computer. Okay. But my experience has been from sitting in different classrooms. It's used kind of like your viewpoint on PowerPoint. It's really good if you know how to use it. Sure. So I'm just wondering, with all this, the 1-to-1 that St. Paul has done, and mm-hmm. The district I'm working in, that's their move next year is Chromebooks for every student. Is that kind of a fear that you have? Maybe not for you, but the future of higher ed, that students are going to come and they don't have kind of that personal relationship that you develop by closing the device. Yeah. I don't know if I'm afraid of it. I think that it's not clear it's going to work the way people think. I think there's a pretty high probability it might work out differently.
So today in methods, right, we did a bunch of stuff. I did some direct instruction, as you guys would say, for a little bit. And then we did this cool reading about this book called On the Fire Line, which is an ethnography of wildfire fighters in Arizona. And he has an methodological appendix where he talks about being a firefighter and then studying his fellow firefighters and all that kind of stuff. And then they got into 3 groups, and they each had a different task. One group was to talk about what made this really good writing and how it was set up. The other group was supposed to talk about what made it good sociology. And the third group was to talk about the strengths of the methodology. And then after they did that, this is a junior level class, they went up and they each wrote their things on the board. And at the end of it, everybody got out their phone and took a picture.
Yeah, my phone, I'm able to take, I'm able to take a picture and make a PDF.
Yeah, and they don't do that every time, but I said, let's go through this. Don't bother to try to copy all these down. Just take a picture at the end, and then you'll have it for your notes. So technology, great, helpful, better use of our face-to-face time than watching them copy it down, although I am a big believer in note-taking and margin notes. And the research is starting to show that margin notes help because people are doing surface reading, which is what PowerPoints are. They're surface reading. And maybe the smartboard, the idea is that if you can write on there and add on it, you can add to that. But, but the first question is, why are you using it in the first place, right? What is it you want them to learn? Not, they gave me this smartboard, now I got to figure out how to learn it. So, I don't know. The change is underway, and I am highly suspect of hyperbolic, brick and mortar schools will be gone. Well, they just indicted some for-profit school for scamming students. I mean, as bad as, well, it depends on your point of view, as bad as the retention, something like 57% of students who start as a freshman in traditional age freshman in college have graduated within 5 years, like 57%. It's higher at Augsburg, it's 95% at Carleton or whatever, but 2/3 maybe of people who start finish. So, we got to fix that. Why go to, school for 2 years and blah, 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 blah. The completion rate at for-profits is like 22%. And they've taken their money. And, and I'm an organizational sociologist. So if you are a for-profit company, your first obligation is to your shareholders. And that's required by law. All the decisions have to take that into account first. And I don't mean, are there good people who work at these places who love students? Absolutely. But I'm talking about the organization's legal responsibility. Mm-hmm. And once you're in a for-profit world, game changer. And I would argue with people for that for a long. Oh, it's just the same to go to a for-profit. That's absolute crap. Because the decision making is driven by a different sociological force. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
Well, that's all I have for you.
Okay.